A mystery that cannot be explained. An enigma that defies reason. A surprising and unexpected answer. To encounter such a mystery firsthand may change your life forever. Face to face with the greatest riddles of the ages, the world's most profound mysteries reach out and touch your life in ways you never imagined possible. Extreme Mysteries.
Much of the confusion, hatred, and animosity in the world today can be traced to a single event: the mixing up of the languages at the Tower of Babel. But was there ever such a place to begin with? And if there was, has it been found today? Was there a time in the distant past when everyone spoke the same language and essentially belonged to the same race? What evidence has been uncovered to suggest the people really did begin to build a gigantic tower that would reach to the heavens? Can we determine, with the help of the modern sciences of linguistics, sociology, and archaeology, that a common language and common ancestry all proceed from a single place and a single point in time? Confusing the language would certainly be an efficient way to bring a building project to a halt, if it happened. We'll see what science and scholarship can tell us in just a moment. Can we discover the origin of language, man's most useful and most defining characteristic? According to the Bible, all our languages sprang from one incident: the destruction of the Tower of Babel. In today's world of global commerce, translation services cost nations and industry $250 billion every year. Even in areas as ancient and as closely aligned as the European community, the cost of straightening out all the confusion supposedly caused at the Tower of Babel can amount to billions of dollars. Our neighbor to the north, Canada, faces a language crisis every year in the province of Quebec, as the citizens argue over whether French or English should be the official language. And before we get too smug, here in this country there is an ongoing battle over whether or not teachers in the public schools should be required to be proficient in more than one language. According to the Bible, there was a time that there was only one language and one race of people, and all languages and races in the world had their origins at one place and point in time: the moment of the cataclysmic destruction of the legendary Tower of Babel. But was such a tower actually constructed as described in the Bible? More to the point, did God destroy it and disperse all the inhabitants across the face of the land? Have the ruins of the tower been located by archaeologists? And does this modern-day dictator have some sinister plan in mind for its reconstruction? Scientists and investigators try to bring the pieces of the puzzle together. Language, the experts tell us, is the single most defining characteristic of society. It is the architecture of culture and the glue that binds the people together. It is also the thing that drives nations and peoples apart. But where did all of these languages come from? Did they just spring up by accident? Or is there some scientific support for the biblical account of the Tower of Babel?
We cannot prove the existence of the Tower of Babel.
Not only was there a real Tower of Babel in the past, the tower and the city that bore its name is being rebuilt today by the world's most dangerous dictator.
No knowledgeable person believes the account of the Tower of Babel as historical fact, or that all the races and language of the earth sprang from this one little area in Mesopotamia.
The biblical story of Babel is completely consistent with all of the evidence. Anyone who denies this fact is simply engaging in fantasy or speculation.
Actually, the Tower of Babel concept of racial and language generation is quite easily demonstrated through archaeology, linguistics, and genetics.
According to the Sumerian writings, the temple towers of Mesopotamia were communication centers with the ancient astronauts, or gods.
I believe the tower was intended as a communication device but not with any so-called ancient astronauts, rather with the spirit world of demons and fallen angels.
As you can see, there is no lack of opinion on the subject. There is, however, considerable lack of agreement. Where was the tower located? Is the term Babel the historic name of Babylon? Was the tower completely destroyed, or should we be able to find some remnant of it? Or is the entire story simply a religious myth? To begin with, let's take a look at the story as it was recorded. God was very displeased with what people had become. According to the Bible, wickedness in all its forms was the order of the day. So, God commanded a man named Noah to build an ark. Only Noah and his family were to be saved from a devastating flood that would destroy the world. After the floodwaters subsided, the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, and Noah and his family descended the mountain to begin life anew. It certainly follows that if the survivors of the flood were all of one family, they would surely all speak the same language. They were specifically instructed to not stay in one place, but to go forth and replenish the earth. Instead, they settled in a fertile plain between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. But when the descendants of Noah began building a tower to the heavens, God decided to disperse them. But is this account of the story of Babel fact or fiction? Assuming a tower was really built, are we sure we know why? And by whom? Is it even remotely possible that all the races and languages of the world began here, in this one single location? What was happening in what the Bible calls the land of Shinar that might bring such an undertaking about? The Bible tells us King Nimrod was a great hunter and a builder of ancient cities in what is now modern-day Iraq. Nimrod is thought by many to have been the ruler who set about building a high tower to make a name for himself and his people, and to keep from being scattered as God had commanded. The biblical account doesn't contain many specifics, which leaves us with a double mystery to explore. First, can we actually find a Tower of Babel? And secondly, is there any way to trace the origins of races and languages back to the destruction of that tower? The Bible is silent on the day-to-day events that may have occurred during the construction of the tower. However, we can speculate on how events may have unfolded in Nimrod's kingdom.
Almighty King Nimrod, hearken to the word. The God of our grandfathers' grandfathers cries out in warnings. Go out and make new nations. Stay not here to spite God. Will ye bring down the floodwaters again?
Now, what was your complaint, Vizier?
Not a complaint, Majesty. What the old beggar cries in the street is whispered in some quarters.
Well, who is this God? What is his name?
It is not difficult to imagine a haughty king reluctant to give up the wealth and comfort they had been able to build up in the generations since Noah and his sons came out of the ark. Some undoubtedly were already relegating the story of the flood to the category of myth and legend, while others saw in the work the opportunity to amass a great fortune for themselves. For centuries, skeptics challenged the Bible's accuracy on the Tower of Babel, primarily because they believed the land of Shinar, as referred to in the Bible, did not exist. But, as is so often the case, the scholars ultimately had to give way in the face of new discoveries.
For many years, scholars and students of the Bible questioned the location, even the existence, of the land of Shinar. They knew that Babylon existed from eyewitness ancient historians such as Herodotus and Strabo, who claimed to have seen the great city. But they had no proof, apart from the Bible, that the area around Babylon was ever called the land of Shinar. Then, in the early part of the last century, archaeologists brought forth thousands of cuneiform tablets like this one. On such tablets from Egypt, Syria, and the Hittite and Hurrian kingdoms was the name Shinar in various pronunciations.
Most scholars believe that the original location of the Tower of Babel was here, in what we now know as Iraq. Historians of antiquity, including Alexander the Great, all wrote of seeing the ruins of the Tower of Babel, but they don't tell us precisely where. There have been innumerable archaeological digs over the past 100 years that have unearthed the great treasures of Sumer, Assyria, and Babylon, and a number of sites have been advanced as the logical site of the tower.
The strongest body of archaeological evidence, combined with the biblical account, favors the location of Temenanke, which is in the country of Iraq, in the city of Babylon, 50 miles south of Baghdad. Today, in the city of Babylon, you can go to the Nebuchadnezzar Museum, where they feature a model of this tower as it would have existed in the time of Nebuchadnezzar.
Can we assume, then, that the location of the tower has finally been established? Other reputable investigators don't think so. But what is going on in Iraq to make people think the issue has been resolved? Does the model represent some actual archaeological discovery, or is it just a guess designed to build up the reputation of this man, Saddam Hussein, and, like King Nimrod, make him look important, even indestructible, in the eyes of his people? Something extraordinary is going on today in and around the ancient city of Babylon. We'll try and get to the bottom of it when we come back. The book of Genesis is a narrative about beginnings, and certainly one of those beginnings is the record of how human beings came to speak different languages. If the account of the flood is true, it's easy to imagine a time when all of Noah's descendants, the only survivors of the flood, all spoke the same language. But as is so often the case in the Bible narratives, certain proud and ambitious men decided to ignore God and build a tower so high it would put the king on a level with heaven itself. Still, for an undertaking of this size and scope, the toll on the people must have been enormous. Construction of the tower no doubt demanded more and more laborers and money. The heavy hand of Nimrod was felt in every quarter. The tower was to be more than just a monument to human vanity. It was meant to put Nimrod far above any competition, demonstrating his influence and power. He hoped to make such a great name for himself that none would dare oppose him. The bricks were fire-hardened to make them last through the centuries, and everything was done that could be done to celebrate the king's vanity. The account seems straightforward enough. The existence of the land of Shinar appears to have been established beyond a reasonable scientific doubt, although there is still some question as to exactly where it was.
The Tower of Babel was built for exactly the purpose stated in the Bible, for communications with the gods, or as Bible believers would say, fallen angels or spirits. Where the Bible says the tower was intended to reach the heavens, it was not in a physical sense, but rather as a communication system. This could be done by using quartz crystals, like this quartz crystal here that I'm holding in my hand. If you stack quartz crystals in the right lengths, they will bring in radio waves. In chapter 11 of Genesis, it says that the tower was constructed of burnt bricks. They had been burned thoroughly under intense heat. And made with sand, these bricks would have acquired a quartz-like nature, making it like a giant crystal radio set. They were attempting to tune into the spirit world.
In recent years, some rather exotic theories have been put forth to explain the purpose behind the tower. One theory suggests the tower had something to do with so-called ancient astronauts, a race of spacemen from beyond our solar system who colonized this planet.
Although the ancient astronaut theory is interesting, it involves a total misreading of the scripture. The Hebrew word is B'nai Elohim, which always means angels, supernatural beings, not astronauts or spacemen. Both the Old and New Testament confirms that these fallen angels cohabited with women on the planet Earth, which gave birth to the Nephilim, the fallen ones, the earthborn. It was this contamination of humanity that led to the flood of Noah. All these quaint ideas and theories emerge from a failure to understand the integrity of the Bible as a whole.
There is absolutely no valid reason for questioning the biblical narrative. The historical evidence lends support to the Genesis record. Abydnus, a Greek historian of the 4th century, wrote, "Until this time all men had used the same speech, but now there was sent upon them a confusion of many and diverse tongues." The 1st century historian Josephus wrote, "When all men were of one language, some of them built a tower, as if they would thereby ascend up to heaven. But the gods sent storms of wind and overthrew the tower, and gave every one his particular language, and for this reason the city was called Babylon." Finally, there is the matter of modern archaeology. The precise location of the Tower of Babel is uncertain because there are so many sites, not because there are too few.
Surely a structure of this size, made of fire-hardened brick, would leave some residue behind, even after thousands of years.
Archaeological evidence in the form of cuneiform tablets and reliefs on ancient trays and urns establishes the Tower of Babel's existence outside of the biblical account. Today, only a mound 150 feet above the surrounding plain remains of the Tower of Babel site. However, we do know what it looked like based on reliefs and historical records of Nebuchadnezzar, who rebuilt it in 600 BC following Nimrod's design. Cuneiform tablets reveal Babel had a square foundation, each side measuring 290 feet. The tower stood inside a thick-walled enclosure 450 yards by 500 yards and was surrounded by small chapels, lodging cottages for pilgrims, and a temple containing a pure gold statue of god Marduk, which probably wasn't a fixture of the original Nimrod temple. It is estimated that the Marduk god statue contained over $85 million of gold by today's gold prices. The best way to describe the Tower of Babel is to picture an 8-layer wedding cake, with each layer being smaller than the preceding one. It rose 300 feet into the air. That's 30 stories by today's standards. Gigantic blocks weighing hundreds of tons made up the central core of the tower, with an additional 58 million smaller bricks being used in the construction. Huge vertical stairways extended about 100 feet up the tower to the first story, while another stairway running perpendicular to the wall led to the second story. From the second story, secret passages and stairways led to the top, with resting positions along the way. The Tower of Babel, rebuilt by Nebuchadnezzar, lasted for 200 years until the Persians destroyed it in 400 BC. Alexander the Great ordered 10,000 of his soldiers to clear away the rubble from the tower, but abandoned the project after 2 months. The bricks from the Tower of Babel were later used to build a dam that today diverts water from the Euphrates River into a side canal. The Tower of Babel was truly spectacular, and it was indeed the central feature of the ancient city of Babylon.
Unfortunately for the world, 5 to 10 years ago, the Turks built a dam and flooded the plain near Nimrat Dagi. Several important archaeological sites may be lost forever, but local residents and officials seem to know that the Gate of God, as the tower is sometimes called, is now surrounded by a brackish green lake.
Could it be that the land of Shinar is not where biblical scholars have traditionally placed it? In any event, the nature of the argument seems to have changed from if there was a Tower of Babel to where was it located. One thing seems certain: the tower was destroyed. God had decreed that the building of the tower must cease. According to the biblical account, God destroyed the tower and confused the language of the people, so they would have to separate into races and nations. This brings up the last part of this mysterious story. Is it possible that all of the languages and races of the world have actually arisen out of the Tower of Babel incident?
There are roughly 5,000 languages in the world today, and 50 to 200 unrelated stocks. We can trace the best known of those languages, the Indo-European system, back to about 3000 BC, roughly the time of Babel. After that, we run into a blank wall. To give an idea of how rapidly languages can change, Here's a line from Beowulf written in about the 8th century AD. This is a line of Old English. Try to recognize it. Volde gumen findanton et ehimon swilfote sarigetiode. That translates into modern English as he wanted to find the man who had harmed him while he slept. Now, if English could change that much in a period of approximately 1,300 years, we have no reason to suppose that it took any longer for the other various language families to develop into their derivatives.
I can demonstrate quite simply that it is theoretically possible for all the races in the world today to have developed within a single generation after the Tower of Babel. Now, this is called a Punnett square. The Punnett square is used by biologists to predict the distribution of genetic information. In this case, we will say that the population is all brown-skinned. From the brown-skinned population, we can produce all of the racial skin possibilities, including the black blacks and the white whites, possibly in one generation.
God may have selectively confused people's languages, giving particular individuals the same language. By doing that, he could easily have directed the genetic pairings that resulted in the distinct races that populated various parts of the earth.
Could all of the races and language variations have come from one common source? Theoretically, it does seem possible.
It's common knowledge in anthropology that the growth of world population in the ancient world began here in the Near East, primarily between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. The interesting thing about this is that we have a document in the book of Genesis that describes this ancient process as having begun right here in and around the Tower of Babel. And of course, this is exactly what modern anthropology knows by way of the evidence.
God confounded their languages and they were spread around the world. And you can go all over the world and see the evidence that the ancients of the past reconstructed what they were doing at Babel by building pyramids and ziggurat temples literally all over the world associated with communing with the spirit world. The pattern of the ziggurat that was built in the ancient Sumerian area where the Tower of Babel was built can be found literally all over the world. Some of the pyramids and ziggurats are identical, and they're found in South America, they're found in Central America, they're found in Cambodia, in Indonesia, in India. Worldwide, there's evidence of ziggurats and towers associated with religious sites communicating with the spiritual dimension.
The end of the Tower of Babel's story has not yet been reached. Even as we speak, one more chapter is unfolding. When Nebuchadnezzar still reigned in the city of Babylon 2,500 years ago, he left his legacy for future kings inscribed on cuneiform tablets to repair and rebuild his temples and palaces. According to some Bible prophecy scholars, Babylon, the mightiest and wickedest city of the ancient world, must be rebuilt before the final battle of Armageddon. These ruins, lost for centuries under the shifting sands of Iraq, have now been fully uncovered. In these recently made films, it can be seen that the reconstruction of ancient Babylon is in fact a reality. It has long been a pet project of the Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, and his engineers, architects, and artisans assure him that the city is rising once more. In fact, several of the buildings have been completed. Plans are also underway for a complete reconstruction of the Tower of Babel. The world does not know Saddam Hussein's motive for the rebuilding of Babylon and the fabled Tower of Babel, but perhaps we're about to find out. Whatever his motive, our search for beginnings in this remarkable story is largely a search for ourselves, and that can be the most elusive quest of all.